the new strong man in town. I can't say that Eddie stood out in my high school class. He has always been the kind of kid you couldn't pick out from the crowd. He didn't have long hair, tattoos, piercings, or any other kind of rebellious look to him. He also wasn't the future NBA type. You know what I'm talking about. The guy who comes to class in a suit or neatly ironed or pressed pants and spoke in a crisped, clipped manner, with each sentence oozing with ambition because of their precision. In fact, if you were to look at my high school friend Eddie, he didn't look much of anything. He was not too short, not too tall. He wasn't on the chubby side, nor was he rail thin. There was nothing that stood out about him. In fact, he would always get CS, high CS, mind you, but CS nonetheless. And I would know if he got an exceptionally good grade because he would always pull me aside on the rare occasions when he stumbled upon AB or, even rarer, AB+. But I knew that he was hiding something from the rest of his high school peers. The jocks didn't mess with him because he blended in with the crowd. The usual misfits and rebellious outcasts dismissed him as part of this faceless high school mass called normies. But I knew that there was something special about Eddie because whenever he promised something, he would somehow, someway, against all odds, deliver. It may not happen overnight, and it never did, but he would always remember his promises and manage to pull through. I remember the scene like it just happened yesterday. Our 11th grade teacher, Mr. Peskowitz, assigned us a short reading from Karl Marx's classic Das Kapital. I was aware of Marx and didn't think much of his philosophy. After all, who had time to ponder the deep meaning of whatever some long-dead, bearded visionary from the past had to say? I would rather level up the new feral druid tune I started in WoW. But as me and Eddie went through the reading assignments, one paragraph seemed to light his eyes on fire. Eddie being Eddie, he would basically just stumble along at a snail's pace through readings. In fact, during most assignments, I felt like I was in charge of both our reading and comprehension. To say that most schoolwork fails to inspire him would be quite an understatement. But when we finally covered what I thought was the unnecessarily heavy section of Marx's thought on surplus labor value, I saw something in Eddie's eyes that I honestly hadn't seen before. The dude was seriously interested. He repeated the passage to me, summarized, of course, in Eddie speak. Eddie, so you mean to tell me that the value of my work product is the amount of time, effort, and focus I put into my work? The value of any product or service is the amount of work put into it. I shrugged my shoulders and said, I guess that's what it says. My tone of voice barely disguised my lack of credulity in what I thought was another obscure, irrelevant, and impractical theory from the past. Eddie, this means we all have value since most people can work. Again, I said, I suppose. I guess so. Eddie, then why isn't all work being properly valued? And those words escaped his lips. They had a steely tinge to them. They hit my eardrums the same way a fork, transformed into an improvised knife would. I blew off that scene with Eddie. It was so out of character. For the most part, he is the last person you would expect to be interested in any kind of reading. But it was precisely that scene from 11th grade 20 years ago that flashed through my mind when I saw on my phone the news headline that the United States had fallen to, of all things, a military junta. A junta, as far as these types of arrangements go, is often made up of military and civilian members. Who do you think was front and center of the AP story of the recent coup? Edward Van Dries, aka Eddie, clad in a rather drab short-sleeve office shirt, while surrounded by stern, bemedaled, obviously military men. I can't help but blurt out, Slacker Eddie is the new revolutionary leader of the country? My partner, who was a few feet away doing her thing, couldn't help but chuckle. I tend to blurt things out in a cloud of disbelief from time to time. When I do, she never fails to crack up. Narrator's partner, what is it, babe? Narrator, you don't believe it. My old high school buddy, Eddie Van Dries, is now the leader of the United States. Narrator's partner, oh, you mean the president? I shook my head.
Narrator, no.
Presidents are decided by elections. We obviously didn't have elections. I could tell from her eyes that my words reminded her of the recent painful convulsions that rocked the nation, from Washington state all the way to Florida. Riots, hunger strikes, mass walkouts, plague lockdowns here and there, and of course, the ever-present urban looting and arson. Narrator, you remember, Eddie? I asked her. At that time in Susan's life, she was warming the bench as one of those perpetual cheerleader trainees. Susan, I can't say I do, but it's obvious that you do remember him. Narrator, yes, very much so. No sooner had these words left my mouth that another memory flashed through my mind. A few months after graduation, I was getting ready to leave for college. It wasn't much of a college because my first choice rejected my application. They dropped me like I owed them money. Heartbroken, I took whatever acceptance my backup school choices gave me. Coming from a working class, immigrant family, I wasn't exactly keen on living at home and still dealing with my parents and what seemed like their tightening control. I wasn't exactly looking forward to being told when to go home and to avoid the devil's lettuce, marijuana, or, worse yet, the devil's dandruff, cocaine. I took a non-scholarship offer to an upstate school. I supposed an 8-hour drive was a good enough distance between my parents and me. I was in the process of packing and doing all sorts of crawling through what seemed like a long list of logistics to move from home all the way to the student coops I would be living at. Eddie came by. He never got into the habit of calling ahead, but since we were relatively tight, I didn't exactly mind. But I can understand if you thought I was being rude to him because I had just had so many things to worry about and call around for. I was basically buzzing around my basement room while Eddie slumped his back against the wall. His legs spread on my futon as he manhandled an AC/DC song from my badly tuned acoustic guitar. I'm glad you got into one of your preferred schools, Eddie said. I was so busy going through my checklist and rifling through the pile of mail from the coop and my college's financial aid that I didn't think much of what he said. I was barely there. Eddie, listen, Alex. A serious tone accompanied his words. Eddie, if anything ever happens when I find myself in a position to put you in a role that can help workers in this country, would you help me? I can't say I've frozen in my track when he asked that question. While Eddie never ever made a promise he didn't keep, it is also true that he rarely spoke in such a serious tone. Even more out of character, he never made promises with such a tone. I couldn't quite bring myself to take what he was saying seriously. I wanted to blow him off and say, yeah, whatever, Eddie. But I knew him. He understood that the value of a person increases when they value their words. He was not a blabbermouth, someone full of big ideas and even bigger words, all amounting to nothing. I couldn't think of anything that would make me confident in his ability to deliver on any big promises he might make. But I also knew that this was a person who was serious about his word. Alex, if that day comes, I finally gathered my thoughts together. I will support you. You can appoint me to whatever position in which you think I can contribute. Of course, at this point, I tried to muster as much seriousness as I could in my pear-shaped, overweight, pre-college form. Apparently, that was good enough for him, and he bowed slightly and belted out some nearly perfect riffs from AC/DC's, If You Want Blood. And there surely was a lot of blood in the 20 years since Eddie and I had that conversation. America was always torn between two sides, left or right, upper class or lower class, going outside and being the cup of the world or taking care of things deep inside its own borders. Every election seemed like a tug of war between these opposing axes of the political, economic, and social equation that all countries find themselves in. I wish I could tell you that I was a big fan of the proletariat right after high school. I wasn't. I believe that people can, if they are driven, work their way out and up. Of course, I only needed to look at my own family and how they barely escaped to the United States with shirts on their back. Soon after, a new regime took over our old homeland, a new regime that took everything from those who had something. Instead of giving it to those who had none, this regime kept it in the hands of the few who were fortunate enough to know certain buzzwords: national brotherhood, a brave new future, and might through industry. I remember those phrases bolting out of my dad's mouth as bitterness filled his eyes and his hands clenched, obviously gripped by memories from the old country. I suppose you couldn't fault me for ditching my accent and rushing to look like the clean-cut, all-American kid. Whenever I heard the name of my old country, I felt like I was taking a bath in shame, humiliation, and yes, fear. Given this reality, it was nothing but soul-shattering to see my new home split apart by the same lies, unmet promises, appeals to a past that never was, and stoking the flames of a future that will never be. Describing the news in the past 20 years, I felt very much like watching a TV show you cannot control. You can only sit back, seemingly glued to your seat, and just let it all play out. You know the familiar themes. You know the cautionary tales. No matter how it plays out again and again, resulting in the same tragedy, it's as if there's an unquenchable hope that rises oh so briefly from the carcass of the recent past failed experience. And for 20 years, this dragged on. But this year was different. This was the year of the junta, the year America finally had enough. Eddie threw a stunning series of military victories. He made it clear that there could be such a thing as a working-class revolution, guided by American characteristics. Pay attention to the last part. I remember Eddie quoting Chairman Mao's Little Red Book to me, and he always made a point to talk about the chairman's thoughts and how socialism with Chinese characteristics is possible. Now I can see where he got at least some of his ideas from. I'm just in awe at how quickly the revolution blew apart and just as seemingly instantaneously brought back the country. It's as if he knew which cab to pick and which bandage to slap on. The right words, of course, said at the right time, regardless of their truth, can be counted on to draw the right emotions. And there he is, right on my TV screen, promoting a curious blend of prosperity for all while making sure that the needs of the voiceless, the faceless, the uncounted, and the other are met. We have the technology, the drive, and the spirit. Repeated the moving images on the screen. In a staccato rhythm, Eddie listed the failures of the past regimes and how the new proletarian republic based on private individual initiative is the answer. I have to be honest at that point. It's hard to argue with success because all other opposing views and their matching armies either have shot themselves up in the 20 years running up to this point or were recently annihilated by the combined forces of Eddie and the different strands of the previous U.S. armed forces. I felt like I was watching a historic moment. And then my phone rang. It was Eddie. And true to his word, he made the same offer he made in 11th grade again. I don't think I could turn him down. Stealing my nerves, I decided to copy him and bind myself to the return promise I had made him all those years.